Thank you, everyone. That was beautiful. Today I am preaching a single sermon, and what I mean by that is that this sermon is not part of a sermon series. Next week, I'm going to start a sermon series titled Christian. And the idea behind this sermon series titled Christian is that the word Christian is not defined in the Bible. And this is why we can find on almost any political issue, any social issue, any ethical issue, Christians on both sides of the issue. Because the word Christian is actually only used 3 times in the Bible, and it's not used by Jesus. In fact, Jesus has a different term for his followers, and we're going to talk about that term. And hopefully we're going to eliminate some of the confusion and complexity around what it means to be a Christian by spending 6 weeks looking at that word. Today I'm going to talk about intentional relationships, and I'm preaching this message intentionally today because of something else that is going to begin next week along with the sermon series titled Christian. Next week we are going to start our community groups program. We're inviting all of you, any of you, even if today is your first day here, to take part in one of these groups. I'm going to talk about these groups today. I'm going to lay the theological foundation for it. Hopefully offer a compelling message that's going to make you interested in taking part. But if you're a little confused about what a community group is, we got something for you. You can go to our website at myfaithucc.com and you can watch a little video that we purchased from a church that does community groups really well. And so you can watch this 1-minute video 2 times, 3 times, 4 times, how many times it takes you to figure out what it is we're talking about. But those of you that are here today, you're in luck. We're going to watch the video here. It's only a minute long. But one thing before I show it to you is the video is going to talk about community groups lasting 12 to 18 months. That's not where we're starting. Okay? We're not ready for that. Maybe you're ready for that. I'm not ready for that. Okay? We're going to start with a 6-week community group that's going to meet for an hour and a half. And that is essentially what you would call a starter group or a beginning to a much larger program. And one of the reasons that I am so interested in doing this here is that I've studied churches. And churches that have these community groups where people are intentionally building relationships, these are the churches that are the most beneficial to the members, the individual people, and the churches tend to grow strong both in numbers and also in connection. When people are intentionally getting together just to get to know each other and form relationships. So without further ado, we got a minute here to focus. Here it goes.
So you've been coming to church. Maybe you even serve. You sit in a row almost every week, but now you're ready for more. You want to connect relationally. Or maybe you want to grow spiritually. Those are good ideas. Those are God's ideas, both of them. Because relationships are one of the 5 things God uses to help us grow. And that's why we do groups. In fact, apart from service on Sunday, it's almost all we do. Because you can't grow spiritually without connecting relationally. Which is why groups of 8 to 12 adults meet 3 to 4 times a month for a year or 2. Every time a group meets, they spend time building relationships, exploring truth, and supporting each other through prayer. And as a result, group members experience accountability, belonging, and care. Group is your chance to pursue healthy relationships and spiritual growth. So when you're ready for more, step out of your row and into a circle. Join a group. Life is better connected.
So I want to start off with this idea, life is better connected. Some of you know exactly what I'm talking about because you have family members or a group of friends, maybe as colleagues at work that you're deeply connected to. What I mean by that is that when you show up, you can be yourself, that they know you, that you're not really hiding anything about yourself, that they accept you and you feel comfortable there. They're like, when you walk in the door, they call your name. And it feels good, right? It's like something to be celebrated. And if you haven't had this experience personally, you've probably seen it before. In fact, our popular culture celebrates these kind of connected relationships. Anybody seen the show Friends? Raise your hands, right? Yeah, many of us have seen that show where it's a group of people that are deeply connected. There was another show from, I think, the late 80s, early 90s. I was young enough, I think, to see the reruns. It was a show that maybe wasn't appropriate for me, a 12-year-old, to be watching because of the setting of the show. It was set in a bar in Boston. Anybody know the show I'm talking about? Right? And there was this guy on Cheers that every time he walked through the door, and don't say it if you know where I'm going, they would call out his name. Anybody remember that? Don't say the name, okay? Now, I'm going to put his picture up there, and I want all of us, just because this will be fun, to call out his name together. You ready? Norm! Right? And he would come in, and everybody would laugh, and it would feel so good. And you would feel good when they called out Norm's name, because there's something in you that wants to have your name called out, like Norm's name is called out. Because you know, and I know, life is done better together. Life is better when you're doing it with other people. It's more fun, it's more enjoyable, you got people to celebrate with you, you got people to help you out. Life is just simply done better together. And you already know this. I'm not telling you anything new. I'm just kind of reminding you of something you already know. And this idea that life is done better together, it's been around for a long time. In fact, about 2,000 or more years ago, King Solomon, who was an Old Testament character, some of you know King David, King Solomon was his son. King Solomon, he wrote a book called Ecclesiastes that just shared his wisdom about life. And he talked about a variety of things, but in the book of Ecclesiastes, in the 4th chapter, Solomon talks about relationships. So I'm just going to kind of run through some of Solomon's observations about relationships. I'm going to do it kind of quickly because you already know this stuff. You ready? Here we go. 2 people are better off than one, or they can help each other succeed. So kind of like how Eric Rao, when I was 12 years old, would come over and help me take out the trash. We did it twice as fast when I had somebody there to help. And all Solomon is saying is that when you got a task to do, when you got something that you're trying to achieve, it's better if you got somebody who is going there with you, who's working by your side. You already know that. Solomon then says, if a person falls, the other can reach out and help. But someone who falls alone is in real trouble. Now, I immediately think of that commercial from like 20 years ago, of the I've fallen and I can't get up. Do you remember that one? Scary stuff. It was kind of a funny commercial, at least the way it played out. Maybe I have a bad sense of humor, so forgive me that. But, this is what I'm thinking about. Sometimes in life we fall. And it is helpful to have somebody there to help us get up. And you already know this. And it's not just physical falls. It's emotional falls, financial falls, all the various things that can happen in our life. And if you got somebody there to help you get up, it's a good thing. Now, Solomon continues to talk about this point. This next one's a little R-rated. He says, likewise, 2 people lying close together can keep each other warm. Told you it was R-rated. But how can one be warm alone? And I'm not going to comment on this because it's church, and I can't think of anything church appropriate to say about it, so we'll move on. A person standing alone can be attacked and defeated. Now, I want to park it here for a second. If you think about this in a literal sense, it makes perfect sense. It's why, like, if you're in a big city, you don't want to go down an alleyway alone, right? Because if you're separated alone, you're easily attacked. But there is a spiritual dimension to this as well. And I don't know where you are on this, but one of the big ideas in the Bible is that the real challenge of your life is not a physical challenge. It's a spiritual challenge. The real battle in your life is not a physical battle, it's a spiritual battle. The battle inside of you, or the work inside of you, the challenge inside of you, is far more important, far more difficult than what's going on outside of you. And when you're alone, that internal battle, that internal challenge, you are much more liable to be attacked. Now, some of you might be very uncomfortable with like talking about the devil or Satan or what have you. I'll be honest, I got some discomfort with that too. But Jesus talks about that there's this adversary, there's this force out there that he calls Satan or the devil, who is trying to get at you, who's trying to defeat you, who is attacking you, not so much on the outside, but on the inside. And when you are isolated, when you are all alone, that is when the adversary, the attacker, comes out. Some of you might be aware that Jesus goes off into the desert for 40 days by himself, and that's where he encounters who? The devil, the adversary, Satan, right? And that's where his spiritual struggle happens. And if you've ever watched National Geographic, you know that it is the sheep that gets left behind the herd that often gets attacked by the lion, right? You all know this. And so when you are isolated, when you are alone, you're much more easily attacked and defeated. Solomon goes on to say, but 2 can stand back to back in So if you're in a literal battle, you can be back to back with somebody and they can watch your back. And that's helpful. But if you're in the spiritual battle, you can have somebody watching your back as well. They can look out for you. They can step up for you. They can support you in time of need. They can keep you on track when that adversary, that force inside of you, whatever you want to call it, is working on you and steering you off course. 2 can stand back to back and conquer and succeed. Solomon goes on, 3 are even better. For a triple braided cord is not easily broken. And all he's saying is that if 2 people working in the same direction are more effective than 1, if 2 people, if you have a partner, you're much more able to succeed, then even better if you got 3 or 4 or 5 or a whole team of people. And many of you have been on successful teams. You know exactly what Solomon is talking about. And not only will it help you succeed, but if you have a group of people around you, it will also keep you from getting broken. So this idea, 2 are better than 1, 3 are even better, pretty simple, right? And it's pretty agreeable. You already knew this. Who by a show of hands believes what Solomon is saying? 2 are better than 1, 3, right? I mean, come on, this is kind of an IQ test, right? And so my question is that we all understand that it's good to have other people working beside us towards a common goal, helping us out in our lives. Why is it that we so often live without these relationships? Some of you might know who George Gallup is. If you've ever read a newspaper article or a magazine article and they cite some statistics, odds are it's from the Gallup group. George Gallup is basically a sociologist that goes around and he looks at societal trends, cultural trends. And Gallup had this to say. He said, Americans are among the loneliest people in the world. Americans are among the loneliest people in the world. You probably know some lonely people. One of the ironies about this is that this rise in loneliness in our culture came at the same time as a rise in crowdedness or proximity to other people. Over the last 50 or 60 years, there's been this dramatic transition of people living in rural settings out on farms, now living in suburbs and cities. And so, in fact, we live closer to people than ever before, but we don't live closely with them. Or in other words, we live around people, but quite often we don't live with them. We got a lot of acquaintances. We got a lot of interaction. If you lived in Chicago like I did, I rode a crowded train shoulder to shoulder with people, but I had my headphones in and I didn't know those people. We live around a lot of people, but we didn't really live with them. And so what is going on here that we can live so close to people but fail to have close relationships? And if you read about this societal trend and some of the research that's been done on it, one of the factors is this. You remember these? It's a front porch. Homes used to be built with this, but our architecture is changing. Back in the day, homes were built with these front porches, and so people would go out at night on a walk in the summertime because there was another innovation that hadn't come around yet, which is air conditioning. So back in the day, it was too hot to stay in your house. So you go walk through the neighborhood, and people would be sitting out on the porch, which functioned as a nice in-between space between the public space of the sidewalk and the private space of the home. And it allowed for us to have more casual interactions, to develop relationships just kind of naturally. Now we've replaced these with these. The back patio, the back deck. Quite often this back deck also has a fence around the backyard because we like our privacy. And I'm with you on that. I have a fence around my yard, but it's a chain link fence so everybody can see in and the dogs that are next door can bark and everything. I would love to put up a big fence to have some privacy. But it's because of this that we stop having these interactions with our neighbors. Charles and I were talking about this, and he said that one of the things that realtors point out that contributes to this loneliness or this lack of connection in our neighborhoods is the remote control garage door opener. Right? Because it's now possible to leave your cubicle at work if you work in that kind of setting, drive in your car with the windows up and air conditioning on, pull into your garage, whip down the garage door and step out of your car door into your house and never see a person. And there's part of us, that because life is so crowded, we've seen enough people. We've had enough people ask us and want something from us that we kind of just want to go home and veg out, right? We got Netflix and we got our shows and all those sorts of things. And so, at all costs, we avoid that. But it comes at a cost. So some of the research on isolation, there's some consequences to this. Lost perspective. When you are living isolated and alone, you tend to lose perspective. When there's not somebody in your life that has permission to speak into your life, to offer an alternative point of view, your viewpoint tends to get very narrow. And the options that you see in front of you tend to be reduced. People who lose perspective quite often see the bad things in their life as worse than they really are, because they've lost perspective. Their view is narrow. Fear of intimacy. When your life is all just about you, and you're not connecting with people, you tend to believe that if people really got to know me, they wouldn't like me. And when you think that they wouldn't like you, you're fearful to get connected. And so at a certain point, you start to fear opening yourself up to other people. And so getting close and having deep relationships becomes very difficult because you fear the intimacy that is at the center of a deep, life-giving relationship. Selfishness is often a consequence of isolation. When your agenda, your schedule is all about your needs, your wants, and your desires, and nobody else is in the picture, it's a recipe for selfishness. And finally, poor health. There's a lot of studies on this. I encourage you to Google it because it's a very serious thing. That those who are isolated and alone are 3 times more likely to die. I saw it in the hospital. There was people who were there alone in the intensive care unit when I was a chaplain, and it was those people who were struggling and their health outcomes tend to be far worse. Another study on loneliness said this. So loneliness is often the core feeling that gives rise to emotions of anger, sadness, depression, worthlessness, resentment, emptiness, vulnerability, pessimism. It's quite a list. And so if you're struggling with anger or depression or emptiness or pessimism, maybe it is just a symptom of a larger cause, which is isolation or loneliness. The study goes on to say lonely people frequently feel that they are disliked and are often self-obsessed and lack empathy with others. See, loneliness, it's about you or the individual, but it's also about those around you. Lonely people tend to lack empathy. They fear rejection and keep themselves at a distance, which feeds the loneliness. Remember when I was talking about Satan or this power or this force in our lives that is internal and has the power to destroy us? This gives us an insight to that. It says that lonely people, they fear rejection, they keep themselves at a distance, and they become more lonely, which makes them fear rejection, which makes them keep themselves at a distance, which makes them even more lonely, which makes them fear rejection. You see, it becomes this negative feedback loop or this downward cycle. And that, my friends, is a spiritual problem. And it's not meant to be this way. We were not created for this. It's painful and destructive because God created us for something else. This is a phrase I got out of a book I was reading about groups and loneliness. And it says, you have a God-shaped void that no person can fill, and a person-shaped void that God will not fulfill. And this statement came out of talking about the creation story. Some of you might remember that. If you've never read it, it's the easiest story in the Bible to find. You just open up your Bible at the first page and start reading, right? You just dust it off and you start reading. The first beginning story is about God started creating the world. Day 1, created the world, called it good. Day 2, more creation, good. Day 3, more creation, good. By day 6, he creates you and me, and he says it's very good. Very good. And so things are going really, really well, and then you get into the second chapter of the creation story, which is a different kind of bent on it, but things are no longer good. God looks at the first created human being and says, this is not good. This person shouldn't be alone. This person needs some help. Just turns out that it's a man. So this guy right here, men need some help, right? We need some help with someone. And so God creates a second human being to help that person. And it turns out to be Eve. And so this story often, if you talk about the biblical precedent for marriage, it's used. But what it's really about is about human beings coming together. It's fundamentally about 2 people coming together. Whether it be 2 people coming together as an intimate, loving, romantic relationship, or just 2 people coming together as friends and supporters. And that's where this idea comes from, that even though the first human being was there with God, had a robust relationship with God, that first human being was not okay until there was another person in their life. You got a God-shaped void in your heart. You need to have God in your life. But you need other people. That's how you were created. Here's another statement from these books about loneliness and groups. It says, when you are in a loving relationship, you're growing. And you know this. If you got little kids, you know about growing, right? Because they cause you to reach out of your comfort zone and do new things and try new things. Right? Kids cause you to grow. But if you are in a loving relationship with another full-grown adult, oh my gosh, the growth, right? Because that full-grown adult, they have their own mannerisms and their own ideas about what should happen. And if you want to stick in relationship with that person, you got to stretch yourself. You got to find new aspects of yourself. It causes you to grow. But when you're isolated, you're slowly dying. You're no longer growing. You're no longer stretching yourself. It's easy to think that this is all it is because you're not being forced to find new parts of yourself, to dig deep and to open yourself up to what else God might do through you. It's for this reason that I think as your pastor, if you'll accept me to be that, I mean that on a one-to-one individual basis, that my biggest concern, the thing that I think I do to serve you the best, would be to help you get in a group of people who you can connect with, who you can belong to, who can help address the loneliness factor that we all have. There's a degree about being a human being that is inherently lonely. But when people are in groups, it makes such a big difference. That's why all of you have one of these in your bulletins. And this works really easy. What you do is where it says name, you put your name. Where it says phone number, that's where you put your phone number. Then you put down your email, and then you tell us, I would prefer to meet at this time, morning, afternoon, evening, Monday through Sunday. And then you leave comments if you want to. And you might say, on Tuesdays, I can't do it because I got this. Or Wednesdays, or what have you. Or I'm scared to do this, or I'm still not clear. I've watched the video 5-6 times, I still don't get it. Or maybe I'm interested, but this just might not be the season of life. But we just want to know if you're interested. And then we're going to ask all those who are interested, those who are available to come next week. Right after the worship service, we're going to just have you stay where you are, and we're going to figure out the best day and time for the most amount of people to meet. It's going to start next week. So a week from this Sunday, we're going to meet and just figure that out. And if you've been in this church a long time, you're connected, great. We need to leverage that connection to help other people get connected. And if you're brand new to the church, or if you're not quite sure, this is a perfect way. But we're going to figure this out. And it's going to start slow, it's going to start small, it's going to seem insignificant, but I tell you, friends, this is big. This can be big in your life, and this can be big in the life of our church. Just filling out this little card is a spiritual act to say, yes, I want to connect. God created me for this capacity, and I'm interested. And it might not work out this time around, but I'm interested. And we'll respond to you. Now, you might not believe this, but I believe this with the bottom of my heart. Group life, or community groups, getting people in groups that care for them, where there's intimacy, where you're connected, group life has the potential to impact your life and the life of others more than anything else the church can do. More than my preaching, more than Charles's playing, more than the singing, more than a pastoral care visit, more than anything we can do. I believe getting us in intentional relationships where we're connecting, developing intimacy, and talking about truth within the context of how it applies to our lives. This is a game changer. This is my dream for the church. And it's Jesus' dream. Now, we didn't plan this, but Charles read my scripture. And I was like, he's reading scripture, oh gosh, he's going to take it in another direction. But he went right to the scripture. Because Jesus, on his last night with his disciples, he sits down to pray. And he prays to God, and he prays that they, meaning his disciples and everyone that follows them, that would be you and I, that they would be one. That they would have the kind of relationship that Jesus has with God. That they would have that kind of connection that he had with God with one another. This is his prayer for us. That we would have this kind of connection. And it just so happens that this prayer was the prayer that inspired the formation of this denomination. You might not have known that. But the United Church of Christ came together inspired by this prayer. Very different kinds of ways of doing church. Someday I'll talk about our church history. But very different traditions and ways of doing church came together, inspired by Jesus' prayer and hope and dream, that we might form greater and greater unity. And the reason he was so intent on us having unity was not only the benefits to us, but for others. He said, may they experience such perfect unity that the world will know that you sent me and that you love them as much as you love me. That you love them. How great would it be? How great would it be if somebody was to walk in off the street just so happening to visit us, and they were lonely and they were hurting and they didn't know if their life mattered or if God loved them, and we had gotten so good as a church community at getting people into life-giving groups, that those groups and that the love shared in those groups would show this person, would help them feel that they are indeed loved deeply by the Creator. No matter where they are on life's journey, no matter what they've done or haven't done, no matter what's going on, that this community that we have together, our capacity to love one another, was able to connect that person with the love of God. How great would that be? How great would that be if you had that going in your life? That things got difficult, but you knew you had a group that when you walked in the door, it'd be like, Norm, or whatever your name might be, right? And that people loved you, and you could just be yourself. How great would that be? I mean, how great would it be to have that kind of community if you had a neighbor, or a loved one, or a friend, or if our kids, if we could get so good at this that our kids grew up in a context where they were in groups full of people who are intentionally doing life together with mentors, adult leaders who are loving on them. And they just grew up with a support network thinking this is just how things are. That they were never isolated or alone or without somebody to support them. What if we got so good at this as a group of church people that we even had this for our kids? How great would that be? How great. I'd like to pray for you before we go to our last note. You would just bow your heads with me for a moment. Gracious Lord, we just know what you can do in this world, what you can do in our lives, and you call us to be in relationship with one another. And Lord, each of us, if we were to think about our own story, there's been people and groups of people who have touched us and helped us to get to where we are. So God, I ask that you just might put on everybody's heart here today an inspiration or motivation to get connected, whether it's in one of our community groups or maybe just be more intentional about asking a friend or a family member or a spouse out for dinner or for lunch, or just let's connect and talk. But Lord, when we connect, when we love each other, you are known in this world. So bless this church, bless these individuals, how great you are, Lord, the things that you can do in our lives and that you are promising to do here. In the great name of your Son, Jesus Christ.